Let's give them their Vietnam. And the Soviets are backing their surrogates there in Kabul who've gotten power, and they happen to be secular guys. And Kabul is a kind of a better place then than under the other guys. And, oh, they've invaded. And we give them their Vietnam. And the guys they're opposed to, they're freedom fighters. Right? So we ended up on the side of the Muslim fanatics in Afghanistan. Remember, we didn't go to the Moscow Olympics to show the Soviets? Okay. Fast forward, you read the 9/11 Commission report, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. How does he meet bin Laden? They're both recruited. They meet on the front line as freedom fighters in Afghanistan. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind of the 9/11 attacks. We couldn't find enough of these fanatics in Afghanistan from among the Afghani people, so we had to recruit them from all over the world. All right? And we bring them there. And that's the blowback. And that madness, that silliness, that mixture of political advantage and careerism and everything else, which is what Carter was doing. How do I avoid this problem? I do it this way. Same thing that Johnson was doing when he wanted to sabotage Goldwater, let's do Vietnam and expand it and so forth, has been characteristic of this foreign policy, of this building of empire. Okay? Why are there hostages in Iran? Because somewhere back in 1953, you know, my guy decided, let's get rid of this Allen Dulles and so forth. Let's get rid of Mohammad Mossadegh, the last secular popular ruler we had in Iran. Let's get rid of him. Kermit Roosevelt, the fellow I interviewed on his deathbed, told me in great detail how he did it when I was working for the LA Times. It's well documented now in the books. We bought off the opposition. We do this thing. We get rid of Mossadegh. What are we saddled with then? The new George Washington, like Ahmed Shalaby was going to be the George Washington of Iraq. So we had the Shah, a figure we invented, give him royal heritage and everything. And what is the great crime of the Shah? We make him buy all his junk, all these airplanes, airport, hotels, everything else. He can't pay for it. He says, I better stiffen this thing called OPEC and get some more money for my oil. Goodbye, Shah. Next thing you know, you got these Ayatollahs. And they're angry with us, okay? Now, go ahead, look other side. You got Saddam Hussein. How does he enter the picture? There's a guy named Qasem who is tilting ever so slightly to the Soviets in the Cold War, or so we think. Saddam Hussein is in a gang of thugs. Hey, he can use him to bump off Qasem, all right? So Saddam Hussein then becomes a player. And it's interesting, the only trial that for which the crimes against humanity for which Saddam Hussein was convicted, after all, took place, did anyone notice, in 1982? He was not convicted for any crimes there. I'm not saying he didn't commit any. I think he committed crimes probably every month of his life. But the crimes that he was convicted of were 1982. Now, why did the media in this country ignore the fact that those crimes were all committed before he had his famous handshake with Donald Rumsfeld? Before our government embraced him, right? Before we developed the alliance with Saddam Hussein. These crimes were committed before he became our surrogate in a war against Iran, right? Because they were the bad guys, all right? Now, what's the situation fast forward today in Iraq? Just this last week, our ambassador met with the rogue regime's ambassador in Baghdad to get him to bail us out. That's what's really happening now. And we've given up on the idea this might be some kind of secular democracy. And forget Israel. I don't know, it keeps getting mentioned here at the conference. Let me just say my view on the neoconservatives. With friends like the neoconservatives, Israel doesn't need enemies. You know, Israel has never been more isolated and in a more vulnerable position in the Mideast thanks to Wolfowitz and Pearl and these people. It's just incredible. And the Israeli public has rejected politicians who've taken that position. They know. Why? Because we now have an arc of religious fanaticism going from Lebanon to Iraq, Shiite fanaticism. We've destroyed any possibility of secular alternatives, and we are dependent for our exit strategy in Iraq on the very people that we say are the greatest menace in the world, the people who are running Iran. That they are surrogates that are sitting that we're protecting in the green zone. These are people who lived in exile in Iran. They were trained there. They still get their money there. According to our military, they're getting advanced weaponry from there. And Ahmed Chalabi was even accused by our government of having been an agent for Iran. Our George Washington turned out to be an agent. So what I'm suggesting then is that in the name of we know what we're doing, we have the information, we are rational, we are adults watching the store. If you actually look at the sequence of events, they're bizarre. If someone did this who was cleaning your house, you would fire him. You know, I mean, there's not one single instance holds up. It's absolutely bizarre. And the argument is compelling every time. We have to stay the course. Whether it was wise to get in or not, we have to stay the course, because getting out is worse, right? And that was the argument that drove Vietnam. Now, Daniel Ellsberg, I don't want to speak for him, but I interviewed him many times in my life. And Daniel Ellsberg was once a gung-ho believer in the mission, you know, and he was there, all right? And then, quite early on, figured out this was not working, you know? Now, we still went on, after many people had figured that out, went on killing a lot of people. And you ask people now, what was the reason why we were there? Why was it so difficult to get out? Interesting question. Remember those arguments? You can't just get out? And the prediction is, if you get out, as there are these dire predictions about Iraq right now, if you get out, oh, this will happen, and this will happen, and that will happen. They love to do that. They love to get you involved, and then it's your responsibility to figure out how to get out. I remember thinking about this. Wait a minute. I first wrote about Vietnam sitting there in Saigon and in Phnom Penh and everything in 1964. I said, don't go in here. Don't. Somehow I had to spend much of my adult life telling them how to get out. And that's the way I feel about Iraq, you know. You say, don't go in, and now somehow they hold all the high cards. You can't just get out. Well, what was the great debate about Vietnam? And most of those American soldiers and most of those Indo-Chinese people died after Nixon promised to get us out. Okay? What was the great argument? The domino theory, a communism will be enhanced. You go back and look at what was said, right? No reason to ever say it. The Sino-Soviet dispute had begun back in the 1920s. There were already even two communist governments in the world that were speaking to each other, you know? I mean, the tension was real. Read Khrushchev's memoirs or anything. I mean, there was no international communist conspiracy in a timetable to take over the world. It was hokum. They knew it. But they made all these dire predictions. Fact is, we got out the wrong way. We waited too long, and we got out under the most ignominious of circumstances, lifting people off the embassy. It wasn't necessary to do that. There were negotiated agreements 5 years before, 7 years before, that could have been put in place. It could have been orderly. Didn't have to be chaos, you know. That same possibility is true for Iraq. You don't have to get out 8 o'clock the next morning. You just have to be serious about it, that you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. You're making matters worse, okay? Well, when we finally are forced to leave Vietnam, we get out under the most ignominious circumstances, the biggest defeat America's ever had, in the eyes of the world. What happens? Communism becomes supreme, right? The red tide, you know, if we don't find them there, we'll have to find them in San Diego. You know, now I know there are people in San Diego who actually believe those workers coming across the border are communist Chinese agents. I've had those conversations. But the fact of the matter is, the one thing that happened, which is anyone who had read anything, had, you know, even read Graham Greene's The Quiet American, had read Bernard Fall, had read anything, would have known what happened. Red China and Red Vietnam went to war. They went to war over Cambodia, where the Red Chinese, with our blessings, and Jimmy Carter's blessings, were backing the attempt to return Pol Pot back to power. Such is the cynicism, okay? After the Vietnamese had kicked them out, I think too late, all right? But what happened? They first fight over that, and then they fight over their historic border disputes. And anyone who knew anything about the history of the region would know that after 1,000 years of Chinese occupation, the Vietnamese did not fight this whole battle to turn their country over to the Chinese. You know, it wasn't going to happen, and it didn't happen, okay? And quite the opposite has happened. The two fastest growing capitalist nations in Asia are run by these communist regimes that defeated us, okay? You know, that's just a reality. And no one absorbs it. How can we get this all so wrong?